Chapter 1. Contact and Carnage. The sky fractured like glass. It began with a tremor, subtle and uncertain, rippling through the quiet night over Jakarta's southern district. Then came the sound, a low mechanical wail that set dogs howling and shattered windshields. A streak of luminescent blue ripped across the starscape, and something enormous pushed through Earth's upper atmosphere with the roar of an angry god. Moments later, fire rained from the heavens. 3 colossal vessels descended from orbit like gods cast in obsidian, each shaped like an elongated spire with spiraling grooves and jagged fins that twisted unnaturally in the air. They hovered silently for one terrible heartbeat, then the carnage began. The Valharr attacked with surgical brutality. Each warrior stood nearly 7 feet tall, wrapped in skin-tight armor that shimmered with shifting colors, like oil on water. But it was the helmets, those grotesque biomechanical crowns fused to their skulls, that truly horrified. They pulsed with an inner light, flickering like living things. Grotesque ridges and metallic tendrils snaked down the backs of their necks, twitching like the legs of a spider even as they moved. The first wave hit the financial district at 2:14 a.m. Captain Ren Korran hadn't slept in 3 days. He had barely enough time to drag on his reinforced gear before his outpost at the rooftop of the Guardian Tower shook with impact tremors. The building 2 blocks over, once the gleaming headquarters of Altari Corp, simply exploded. Not from a missile, but from within. A Valharr warrior had punched through 20 floors, tearing humans apart with hooked plasma blades and gravity hammers. "Move! Move!" Ren bellowed, shoving a young corporal aside as debris rained down like shrapnel. A piece of flaming rebar tore through one of his squad's shoulder plates, dragging the screaming man backward as the rest scattered. Ren raised his gauntlet rifle and fired, 6 plasma rounds stitched across the Valharr's armored chest. It didn't flinch. Its helm turned slowly, and a hiss-like steam escaped from its mouth. The helm's light intensified. The creature charged. The 2 collided mid-air. Ren felt the shockwave rattle his bones as he dodged the downward arc of a gravity axe. The weapon carved through a concrete pillar like paper. Ren rolled, jammed a thermal blade into the creature's side, and yanked. Blood, dark and thick like tar, gushed from the wound. The Valharr shrieked, not in pain, but in rage. It grabbed Ren's head, slamming it against the floor twice before he managed to trigger a shock pulse from his chest plate. Electricity flared, and the alien recoiled. Ren surged upward, grabbed a fallen beam, and brought it down with every ounce of force he had, right onto the alien's head. The helm cracked. There was no explosion, no gore, just a horrifying silence. The Valharr froze mid-swing. Its body trembled, and then, with a soft exhale, it collapsed onto its knees. The light within its helmet faded. The metal peeled back slightly, like cracked skin, revealing a gaunt, almost childlike face beneath. Pale, expressionless, confused, Ren stood panting, covered in blood, smoke curling off his scorched armor. The alien looked up at him, eyes wide, uncomprehending. "Where am I?" it whispered, its voice high and uncertain, like a boy who had just awoken from a nightmare. "What the fuck?" murmured Corporal Jane, who had returned dragging 2 injured soldiers. The alien touched its own face and whimpered. "What have I done?" Suddenly its body convulsed. It screamed not in rage but in pain, holding its head with both hands. A thin trickle of blood oozed from its ears. The psychic backlash tore through the minds of everyone within 10 meters. Ren stumbled backward as memories not his own flooded his skull. Screams. Fire. Worlds consumed. Blood running in rivers. And Laughter. Alien. Mechanical. The others were vomiting, clutching their heads. Jane had collapsed. Ren clenched his teeth and jammed a neural suppressor into the alien's neck. A soft hiss. The creature went limp. 3 minutes later, they were back on the extraction skiff. The city burned behind them. Hundreds dead, thousands more likely to follow. The alien, unhelmeted, twitching but docile, lay strapped to a reinforced cot. Ren stared at it, jaw clenched. "Doc Marias is gonna love this," he muttered, not even bothering to hide the sarcasm. As the skiff flew over the smoldering remains of the Jakarta skyline, a fourth Valharr ship began descending from the clouds, larger, darker, and somehow breathing. The war was only beginning. Chapter 2. Mind Wars. The alien lay still beneath thick restraints, twitching occasionally as though caught in some unending fever dream. Monitors hissed quietly around it, a symphony of flickering green lines and erratic pulses. Dr. Lila Mirez stood at the observation window, arms crossed tightly, watching the thing through glass reinforced to withstand a tank shell. The unhelmeted Valharr, nicknamed Orin by the techs, was no longer the towering monster that had slaughtered dozens on the Jakarta rooftops. Devoid of his living helmet, his presence was almost pathetic, frail, haunted. He rocked slowly, murmuring to himself in a language that changed every few minutes, half in broken Valharr dialects, half in perfect English he could never have learned. "It's like there are 1,000 voices in his head," Lila whispered, voice barely audible through her mic. Captain Ren Korran's reflection loomed beside her, taller and darker, eyes hollow from too many sleepless hours. He hadn't taken off his flak vest. Blood still crusted one of the shoulder pads. "He told me he remembers being born as a weapon," Ren said. "Not trained. Born. Programmed." Lila turned slowly. That helm wasn't a helmet. It was a parasite. A living neural override system. It jacks into the cerebral cortex, suppresses emotional centers, and rewires combat instincts. Ren's jaw flexed. "So he's not evil. He's not anything. He's possessed." A shudder ran through the lab. Orin began to seize again, limbs thrashing wildly. The sedative restraints injected fluid through his spine ports, trying to calm the storm. For a moment his eyes rolled back, but then they locked directly on Ren and Lila. "Their pulse comes," he hissed. "Your minds are unsealed. The silence hungers." Lila's tablet erupted in alarms. Brainwaves off the chart, electromagnetic spikes tore through the lab, monitors exploded, spraying glass. A guard slammed backward against a wall as blood gushed from his ears. Ren pulled Lila to the floor as Orin screamed. But it wasn't a scream. It was a chorus. Dozens, hundreds of overlapping voices screeched through the chamber, echoing through metal and flesh alike. Memories that weren't human surged into every nearby mind. Battles fought under alien suns, planets cracked in half, children drowned in atmosphere turned to acid, and always, always the pressure of the helm, whispering commands, denying identity. "Kill, kill, kill." Ren forced himself to his feet. Gritting his teeth, he grabbed the neural suppressor override from the wall and jammed it into the main control node. The lab lights dimmed, and with a final, warbling shriek, Orin collapsed, unconscious again. The room smelled like burning ozone and iron. Hours later, Ren stood in the sub-level tactical chamber as a map of Enceladus hovered in the air. The moon's icy surface flickered with strange energy signatures. "The helms are grown," Lila explained, pointing at the distortion fields, "in incubators inside that ship. We believe they're semi-sentient biomass. Originally, they were a separate alien species, probably parasitic, but the Valharr merged with them generations ago. Now the helmets are the dominant half, Grin lit a cigarette. So we destroy the source. Cut the snakes off at the head. More like sever the roots of a forest. The hide will retaliate. But without their helms, the Valharr revert. Not just docile, they start to feel. Regret, guilt, and worse. They can't cope. Their minds unravel. Oren's brain is degrading. He might burn out in a week. A beat passed. Do we choose between saving their souls or letting them be weapons? Ren crushed the cigarette under his boot. I'll take a team. We hit Enceladus in 48. The drop into Enceladus orbit was like falling into a storm made of glass and shadows. Ren's strike team, a mix of hardened ex-Marines, tech specialists, and orbital commandos, rode a stealth pod through the outer cloud layer. The alien cruiser loomed below like a metallic thorn buried in the moon's surface. It pulsed slowly, rhythmically, like a living heart. Inside, the air was thick with humidity and bioluminescent spores. Vines of twitching metallic tissue coiled along the walls. The smell was rancid, something between rotting meat and scorched iron. They found the first incubator chamber 30 meters in. Dozens of half-formed helms floated in amniotic fluid, suspended by organic tendrils from the ceiling. They pulsed softly, whispers curling through the air in fragmented thought. Obey. Command. Silence. Purge. A soldier named Harker stepped too close. One of the helms lunged toward the glass, its front split open to reveal a swirling mass of neural tissue and tiny mechanical fangs. Christ almighty, he muttered. They set the charges. Ren's hands didn't shake, but only because they'd already gone numb. As he keyed in the detonation sequence, alarms erupted. Lasmir warriors, fully helmed, charged from the shadows. Their movements were unnatural, too fast, too precise, too calculated. One soldier screamed as a plasma whip sliced him in half at the waist. Another was impaled through the chest by a spinning glaive that retracted with a wet squelch. Ren unloaded 3 rounds into one's knee. As it stumbled, Harker tackled it, cracking the helm against the bulkhead. Sparks flew. The helmet split open and the warrior fell to the floor, twitching. He looked up at them with terrified, human-like eyes. Help, please. Ren's jaw clenched. Blow the charges. The explosion shook the ship from end to end. Incubation tanks burst, spewing gore and liquid down the walls. A psychic pulse erupted outward, knocking everyone off their feet. As Ren struggled to breathe, Oren's voice whispered into his mind. You've torn the hive. The mind bleeds, but others awaken. The second helm stirs. Darkness swallowed them, and the ship began to scream. Chapter 3. Into the Hive. The alien cruiser was dying. Ren Korran awoke to a stench like scorched flesh and moldy copper. His head pounded with the aftermath of the psychic pulse like a million needles buried behind his eyes. Alarms shrieked in a language that pulsed rather than spoke, something the ship felt more than broadcasted. Fluids gurgled through arteries in the walls as the bioship spasmed, twitching in grief. "Zadis!" Ren shouted hoarsely, wiping blood from his ears as the red glow of emergency nodes flickered across the corridor. 2 down, Tylen and Harv, rasped Harker, dragging himself up with a charred rifle. Rest are up. Injured. Helm backlash cooked our implants. The hallway ahead had transformed. Once smooth and sterile, the corridor was now grotesquely swollen, pulsing with veins of biometal and twitching nerves. Strange, thorn-like protrusions jutted from the ceiling, dripping viscous, purple ichor. The explosion had awakened the hive's defense protocols, or perhaps its immune system. As they pressed deeper into the cruiser's gut, every step was swallowed by a wet squelch. Creatures began to emerge. Not warriors this time, but malformed things. Partial fusions of helm and host. Grotesque figures crawled along walls, screaming with mouths that never closed. Some had eyes where their chests should be. Others had no faces at all, just the twisted remnants of shattered helmets, fused to bone. Ren raised his rifle. Shoot to kill. Nothing gets close. The first abomination charged without warning, its movements jerky, impossible, as if some invisible puppeteer yanked it by threads, its skin peeled like paper as it ran, flayed by its own mutations. Ren fired once into its chest. It didn't stop. He fired again into its knee. The leg exploded. It kept coming, dragging itself forward with a mouth full of steel teeth. Then Harker stepped in and incinerated it with a thermal lance, the creature shrieking in dozens of voices as it melted into the floor. "This place is cursed," someone muttered behind them. "It's not a ship, it's a fucking womb." They reached the helm core soon after. The chamber was vast, like the interior of a cathedral hollowed from bone. Towers of flesh steel spiraled upward into a dark ceiling that breathed slowly, expelling clouds of spores. In the center stood the core, a monolithic sphere of glistening black matter, enshrined in chains of neural tendrils that pulsed with thought. Inside the sphere floated hundreds of helms, alive, aware, watching. The helms turned as one. Ren felt them enter his mind. He staggered. Harker screamed. Another soldier dropped their weapon and started clawing at her own face, sobbing violently. Memories that weren't his burned through his skull. Torture, indoctrination, centuries of war waged not for conquest, but for silence. The helmets needed violence, craved obedience. They consumed personality, digesting it into raw compliance. Each host was hollowed and used until it broke. "You will submit?" The helms whispered, a voice made of countless others. "No," Ren growled, blinking back the tears of pain. "We're here to burn you down." They laid the final explosives around the core, high-density plasma charges calibrated to ignite a cascading nerve fire. A soldier faltered, convulsing as tendrils slithered down from the ceiling. One helm dislodged itself and flew across the room, latching onto the soldier's face. The man screamed as his body snapped upright, bones breaking, muscles bulging unnaturally. His eyes rolled back, and with a burst of speed, he hurled a commando into a wall, splattering her skull like a dropped melon. Ren didn't hesitate. He pulled his sidearm and shot the infected man through the eye. The helm shrieked as the host's body fell. "Now!" Ren roared. Harker activated the charge. The explosion was unlike any fire or force they'd known. It was psychic. The blast didn't just tear the core apart, it shattered the helo consciousness within. The chamber screamed as the tendrils writhed in agony, bleeding thick smoke and disembodied howls. The helms burst mid-air, spraying fragments like bone shrapnel. The cruiser began to collapse. Alarms turned into guttural roars. The ceiling cracked, vomiting fire. The walls buckled and spasmed, trying to regenerate but failing. Harker hauled a dying soldier over his shoulder as they sprinted toward the extraction point. Fluid rained from above, acidic and alive. One corridor had caved in. Another was crawling with helm-birthed things, twisted limbs dragging weapons fused to bone. Ren took a shortcut through the auxiliary arteries, literally cutting their way through the living ship's digestive canals. The floor quivered underfoot. "Get to the docking clamp." They reached it with minutes to spare. The ship was shrieking, consumed by its own mental feedback loop, bleeding itself into death. They launched in silence, watching from orbit as the cruiser imploded, folding in on itself in a slow, tragic collapse. It was like watching a beast devour itself from the inside. Ren didn't look away. Back aboard the Valkyrie-class carrier Oberon, Lila met them with wide eyes. "Oren woke up during the blast," she whispered. "He spoke in 12 voices at once, said a name." "What name?" She hesitated. "Ildren," he said. "It's coming." Ren turned slowly toward the viewport as the stars shimmered unnaturally. The hive was broken, but something deeper had awakened. Chapter 4. Echoes of Peace. They called it the Silence Bloom. When the Helm Core was destroyed aboard the Valharr cruiser, the psychic backlash rippled across the stars. Across battlefields, ships, and cities, helmeted warriors dropped their weapons and fell to their knees. Their helms cracked open like eggshells beneath a boot. Some clawed at their own faces in confusion. Others screamed until their voices gave out. A few simply wept. On Mars' red plains, entire platoons collapsed into fetal positions. In the flooded ruins of Venice, a single Valharr soldier sat motionless in the water, muttering nursery rhymes in a long-dead dialect. Above the orbit of Titan, a massive Valharr dreadnought drifted without command, its entire crew comatose or dead. The decks splattered with blood from heads that burst under internal pressure. The war paused, not in truce, but in shell shock. Ren Korran stood at the observation deck of the Oberon, watching the data scroll past in cold, digital waves. Kill ratios, refugee counts, psychic bleed levels. The numbers meant little anymore. What mattered was the faces. Over 60,000 unhelmeted Valharr had been captured or had surrendered across known space. Most were docile, some catatonic, a few violently unstable. One bashed his head against the bulkhead until his skull shattered, smearing the wall in thick black gore. Another sat in a fetal position and sang to a dead human child for 18 hours. And Oren had changed. His body was weak, wasting away from the neural overload. But his mind, it bloomed like a star-going supernova. He spoke in layered tongues, his eyes glowing with fractured light. He no longer needed words to be heard. Thoughts slid like blades into the minds of those nearby. Even hardened guards began hallucinating in his presence. Ren and Layla stood outside his containment room, watching through reinforced glass. "Is mutating," Lila said softly. "The helm didn't just suppress him. It contained something larger. Now that it's gone, he's a conduit," Ren muttered, "for something worse." Inside the cell, Oren's limbs jerked sporadically. Glyphs etched themselves into his skin, alien symbols that bled silver before fading. He opened his eyes. "You opened the tomb," the thought hissed in Ren's skull, and something answered. Lila staggered backward, nose bleeding. Ren grabbed her and pulled her away from the window as sirens flared in the medbay. Another psychic seizure, this one farther away in Refugee Ward 3. They arrived seconds too late. A Valharr detainee had snapped. The guards hadn't seen it coming. One moment he was sitting quietly, muttering poetry to himself. The next, he tore the throat from a Marine with his teeth and screamed until blood erupted from his eyes. His body convulsed as 4 others in nearby cells began howling in unison. Ren fired 2 shots point blank into the screamer's skull. It didn't stop moving until the 3rd round destroyed the brainstem. One of the other detainees was trying to claw her own heart out, shrieking about the black mirror inside the stars. The medic sedated her. The rest weren't so lucky. 7 humans dead. 2 more in surgery. One had ripped out his own eyes after prolonged exposure to the psychic storm leaking from the unhelmed mines. Ren stood in the aftermath, boots soaked in blood, jaw locked tight. "This isn't peace," he said. "It's psychic rot." That evening, The Council of 12 convened on the upper deck, a meeting of Earth's highest military and scientific minds. They debated with clenched fists and frayed nerves. "We must eradicate every last Valharran," Admiral Dross barked. "Helmed or not, they are infected." Lila countered, exhausted but firm. "That's not justice. That's genocide. The helmets were the virus. The Valharr are victims." Another counselor, pale and sweating, held up a datapad. "Victims don't cause 500 human suicides in one day from residual mental bleed." Ren stood, arms crossed. "They're broken, but not lost. They can be helped." The room erupted into argument, voices overlapping, snarling with fear. It was only when Oren's voice entered every mind in the room simultaneously that silence fell. "I am the threshold, the echo of your sins, the gate to what you buried. You hear me now. The heel is coming. Ildren walks. He never wore a helm." The room shook, not physically, but in the mind. One counselor began sobbing, another collapsed. Dross vomited blood and collapsed in his seat, his eyes fluttering like faulty lenses. Ren turned to Lila, face pale. "We can't contain this." Later that night, in the moonlit hallways of the Oberon, Ren walked alone. Shadows danced, distant murmurs echoed behind closed doors. He found Oren seated in his containment room, cross-legged, smiling. "You're not Oren anymore," Ren said quietly. "No," the voice answered. "Oren is gone. I am what remained once the helm died. I remember." "Remember what?" The smile widened. "Ildren was never bound. He made the helms. He fed them thoughts. I was his first. The prototype. The only one who begged." Ren felt his knees weaken. The lights flickered. "You broke the mind jail. You set him free." Oren lifted his head, and his eyes, now fully black, starlit and swirling, locked onto Ren's. "The final helm awakens." Chapter 5. The Final Pulse. Space screamed. Above Earth's orbit, a rift had torn open, an ulcer in the fabric of the void. It shimmered with shifting geometries and impossible color. A wound, leaking light that hurt to look at. From it spilled the remains of Ildren, the first mind, the architect of helms. It was not a ship. It was thought, made form. The entity loomed across the starscape, its limbs a lattice of nerve and machine. Faces, valor and human alike, etched its skin, twisted in agony. Vast wings of obsidian intellect unfurled across the thermosphere, brushing satellites into ash with a hum. Wherever it passed, communication failed. Memory dissolved, time stuttered, and it hungered. Ren Korran gripped the rail of the Oberon's forward command deck, jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. The rift pulsed every few seconds, each wave stronger, flooding the minds of everyone on board with impossible whispers. Some wept. Others tore at their own faces until the medbots sedated them. Lila stood nearby, pale, trembling. A neural stabilizer wired to her skull. Blood had crusted around her nostrils. Her voice was hollow. "It's not a ship. It's not a god. It's memory, given purpose. Every death, every scream, every helm, it fed Ildren. He was never bound by a helm. He is the helm." Ren didn't respond. His gaze was locked on Earth below, its cities glowing unaware beneath the chaos building in the void above them. "Oren's ready," Lila whispered, as if the name still belonged to a person. Ren turned. Oren, what remained of him, stood behind a transparent barrier in the containment wing. His body was thin, bones like branches under tight skin, but his eyes burned like collapsing stars, "I can hold the breach," he said. His voice echoed in their skulls, soft and infinitely distant. "Ildren will notice. I can draw him in, but it will consume me. What I am, what's left of him inside me, will vanish." Ren nodded once. Orn stepped forward, lifting a small, crystalline device crafted from helm fragments and human tech, a disruptor forged to target the core impulse frequencies of the helm hive-mind. The Oberon launched. The final battle began not with missiles, but with silence. As the Oberon approached the edge of the rift, sound ceased. Even inside the ship, hearts beat more quietly. Every creak of armor, every breath, seemed to echo too long. The stars vanished behind the blooming form of Ildren, who turned slowly, infinitely, his awareness focusing like a hurricane's eye. The moment Orin stepped onto the outer hull, Ildren saw him. A scream tore through the cosmos. The surface of Ildren's body writhed as faces peeled open, revealing vast networks of teeth and writhing limbs. He surged forward, spearing tendrils of memory construct toward the ship. The Oberon fired every weapon it had, torpedoes, railguns, antimatter spikes. Nothing mattered. The attacks passed through Ildren as if through a shadow's breath. Ren and his team held the external bay with their lives, as biomechanical horrors descended, echoes of helmed warriors twisted by the final pulse. They came on wings of wire, eyes empty, limbs bladed. Private Hask was torn apart at the waist by a flying construct, her top half screaming as it flailed across the hull. Sergeant Dunn lit a thermal detonator in his chest and tackled a swarm of drones off the ship's edge, detonating in a burst of red light and vapor. Ren's plasma blade buzzed through flesh and wire, limbs flying in arcs of dark blood. He took a spike to the thigh, roared and kept moving. Orin stood still as it all unfolded, hands raised, mind burning. "Howdring!" he roared, not with voice but will. The entity paused. From within Orin, light erupted. Not firelight, but memory. Light. A cascade of screams, hopes, and thoughts flooded outward. Every helm destroyed, every host freed, every life stolen. Orin showed it all, forced it into Ildren's soul. The disruptor in his chest activated. Ildren shrieked. His form rippled. The stars behind him warped. Tendrils of dark mind stuff convulsed, lashing out, tearing apart the Oberon's bow. Ren was flung backward as air vented into space. He caught a rail, fingers breaking on impact. All he saw was Orin rising, ascending, as the light within him outshone even the bleeding sun cresting Earth's edge. Then, a final pulse. Wait, it all-consuming. When Ren awoke, Earth was calm. Ildren was gone. The rift had sealed, vanishing like a scar forgotten. The sky above was clear. Satellites resumed function. Psychic bleed readings flatlined. Orin was nowhere. Where he had stood, nothing remained. No body, no blood. Only a circular imprint scorched into the hull, a helmless ring. Weeks later, Ren sat with Lila at a council summit. The surviving Valharran, now forever unhelmed, had begun speaking again. Some painted, some stared at the sky, others simply held hands and cried. Ren presented the motion, the Helmless Accord, a treaty between human and Valharr to ensure no sentient being would ever be bound by forced thought again. As the council voted, Ren felt a whisper. Faint. "Thank you." He looked up. A single star shimmered, just a little too brightly. And then it winked out.